My kid's standing out there and he's like almost 6 feet tall. So you can see that it washed away like 12-foot tall berm of dirt. And it just keeps going as we look downhill here. It gets deeper and deeper, and there's all these trees that have fallen over from the kind of landslide that was created. So you can just see how this enormous slurry of clay and mud made its way down. You can hear Butte Creek at the bottom here. It's not that far. It's what happens when you put millions of gallons of water on super steep slopes with deep soils.
Today we're talking about one of PG&E's hydropower flumes in Butte Creek Canyon. It sprung a big leak last week, and all that water caused a landslide, and this massive kind of slump of mud and dirt and rocks went down about 1,500 feet down the mountain into Butte Creek, and it created a dam that backed up Butte Creek. And then eventually the creek kind of blew out that dam, and we got this big slug of kind of orange sediment that's been filling up the creek for the last 4 or 5 days. So there's some worry about that because the creek's got a wild Chinook salmon run in it, of fish that come up from the Pacific every year. And right now there's about 500 fish downstream of the blowout that are kind of waiting through this time of year until they spawn in the fall. And so there's concern that those fish are going to die. And there's also concern that all this muck in the creek is going to make it hard for the salmon to spawn later this year in the fall. So Upper Butte Creek is an interesting place for a few different reasons. One of them is because we've got one of the only wild Chinook salmon runs in the state. When they put in the dams at Orville and Shasta, they blocked off the upper Sacramento and the Feather River watersheds. They blocked off thousands of miles of fish habitat. So really the only places we still have wild Chinook salmon in the interior of California in the Central Valley are between Orville at Orville Dam and Redding at Shasta Dam. But everything else is pretty much blocked off behind these giant dams, or just by other dams on tributaries like the Stony Creek or the Yuba River. Butte Creek got mined heavily in the 1850s, including hydraulic mining. And that means they washed the mountains down and they sluiced the gold. And one of the ways that they were able to do that was by using these canals that diverted water from Butte Creek up onto the hill over a course of 9 or 10 miles. And once hydraulic mining was banned, they figured out, hey, there's just when hydropower starting to get a hold, over 100 years ago. Like, hey, we got water rights and a canal already built. And so the powerhouses on Butte Creek were some of the first hydroelectric development on the West Coast. So that's just all to say that there's kind of this pretty crazy backstory as to why these canals exist in the first place. So just to give a little regional context on where this is happening, we're about 1.5 miles above Forks of Butte and Garland Road, and you're looking out over Magalia and Paradise and Chico and Forest Ranch down Butte Creek Canyon. This canal, a lot of it is dug into the hill, and then there's places where it's on elevated kind of flumes made out of steel. In the past, they're made out of wood. And so a lot of that old ditch is just places where they dug out a ditch and they stacked up a bunch of rocks, basically built a rock wall. And so this ditch is just, in some places the bottom is lined with gunite, which is sprayed concrete. In other places it's just a natural bedrock that they dug down to. The bottom of the flume kind of was leaking under the gunite sidewall, and it just kind of created a big hole and sucked out. It's made itself bigger and bigger, and then you had this gushing of water, and so it looked like it was running about 40 CFS, which is about 1 million gallons an hour, and that all dumped straight down into Butte Creek, and it created this new kind of giant gully that it's pretty huge. There's about 1,500 feet or so from the blowout down to Butte Creek, but it drops, like 500 feet. So just to take it back to the fish real quick, one thing that's interesting here is that salmon don't make it up this far. And there's a lot of trout in this section, and down here's Forks of Butte where you can drive in a passenger car. But the salmon currently, they only make it up to about to the Sabla, and then there's the Centerville Head Dam is actually a barrier to fish passage. But even below that, there's some waterfalls that make it pretty hard for salmon to get up that far. The water that's being diverted from Butte Creek into this canal comes back into the creek. It's 1 million gallons an hour that aren't going down the creek itself, which would be great if it was in the creek for trout. PG&E was trying to sell their projects here, the Lower Centerville and DeSabla powerhouses. And right now they're not on the market. But it kind of begs the question, these projects both have really deteriorating infrastructure. They're both over 100 years old. Who would want to buy this when the liability is that if your ditch blows out, you're going to send a bunch of mud down the hill and potentially decimate one of the only wild salmon runs left on the West Coast? One of the conversations that's happening is that this project is worth negative money, right? It's like, who wants to give PG&E money for a broken project? This project is a liability. I think ideally we get these canals taken out, and all that water that's currently going through canals actually runs in Butte Creek and helps us have our salmon not go extinct. Even if the lower and upper Centerville canals are decommissioned, there are water rights for ag water users in the valley from the West Branch feather that are delivered through the PG&E canals from the West Branch over through the DeSabla Reservoir into Butte Creek. The 2009 relicensing environmental impact report for the hydropower licenses on Butte Creek recommended that PG&E install a pipeline underneath the DeSabla Reservoir, aka DeSabla Forebay, because right now this shallow lake, it can add up to 1 degree Celsius of water temperature in the time the water transits from the canal through the reservoir into the outlet. No work has really been done on that, even though it's been almost 15 years since the relicensing. So all of the stuff that's happening with the blowout is happening in this larger kind of political context of PG&E's bankruptcy, PG&E's liability for things like the Camp Fire, which just happened right over the hill here, California's desire to decarbonize, and therefore seeing hydropower as a special kind of energy that's cleaner than coal or natural gas. That's pretty complicated, but I think the thing that is clear is that dumping millions of pounds of mud onto a salmon run that's on the brink anyway, that's not good with anyone, and we just can't keep having this happen.